It was a quiet summer in Willow Creek, a small town known for its dense forests and untouched wilderness. The Thompson family had recently moved into the outskirts, seeking a peaceful life away from the bustling city. Their new home came with a sprawling backyard that bordered a vast woodland. Hidden in the trees was an old weathered treehouse that the previous owners had built for their children. 12-year-old Sarah and her younger brother Ethan were thrilled to discover the treehouse. It was their new adventure spot, a place to play during the day and whisper secrets at night. The treehouse, though rickety and covered in moss, had a certain charm. The carved initials and faint traces of chalk drawings hinted at a lively past. But there was one odd detail that stood out, a strange marking on the floor. It looked like a crudely carved spiral, surrounded by smaller, jagged symbols. One evening, Sarah was playing in the treehouse alone. The sun had just set, and the forest seemed unnaturally still. As she traced the spiral with her fingers, a chill ran down her spine. Suddenly, she heard a faint whisper. It was indistinct, like a soft breeze carrying distant voices. "Who's there?" she called out, peeking through the treehouse window. No one answered, but when she looked down, she saw something or someone standing at the base of the tree. It was a figure shrouded in shadows, their face obscured. The figure stared up at her for what felt like an eternity before disappearing into the woods without a sound. Terrified, Sarah climbed down and ran to her parents, but when she explained what she saw, they dismissed it as her imagination. A week later, Ethan found an old wooden box hidden in the treehouse. Inside were photographs of children, none of whom they recognized. The children in the photos all seemed happy, except for one detail. Their eyes were scratched out. Alongside the photographs was a small, brittle notebook filled with illegible scribbles and that same spiral symbol repeated on every page. That night, Ethan had a nightmare. He saw the treehouse, only it was surrounded by fire. From within the flames, the shadowy figure emerged, pointing directly at him. He woke up screaming, and his parents found him with deep scratches on his arms. Concerned for her children, Mrs. Thompson decided to ask the neighbors about the treehouse's history. What she learned left her shaken. Decades ago, the land belonged to a man named Harold Greaves, a recluse who was rumored to dabble in dark rituals. When children in the neighborhood began disappearing, the townsfolk suspected Harold. One night, they stormed his property and found him in the treehouse, performing a strange ritual. He was arrested, but the missing children were never found. After Harold's death in prison, the treehouse became a ghostly reminder of the horrors. The previous owners had tried to demolish it, but every attempt failed. Tools broke inexplicably, workers fell ill, and some even claimed to see Harold's ghost in the trees. Eventually, they abandoned the effort, leaving the treehouse to decay. Determined to rid the treehouse of its curse, Mr. Thompson decided to burn it down. He gathered kerosene and matches, ignoring Sarah and Ethan's protests. As the flames consumed the wooden structure, an unearthly scream echoed through the woods. The family watched in horror as shadows danced within the fire, forming the shape of the figure Sarah had seen. The flames spiraled upward, twisting unnaturally before vanishing entirely, leaving the treehouse untouched. From that night on, the Thompson family was plagued by relentless hauntings. Sarah would wake to find muddy footprints in her room. Ethan would hear whispers calling his name from the backyard. And Mrs. Thompson began seeing the shadowy figure in mirrors, always standing behind her. Unable to endure the terror, the family eventually fled Willow Creek. Their home remains abandoned, the treehouse still standing, waiting for its next visitors. Even today, locals claim to hear children's laughter and anguished screams emanating from the treehouse. Some brave souls venture close, only to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The treehouse is a legend, a relic of horror etched into Willow Creek's history, a place where shadows live and the past never dies. After the Thompson family fled Willow Creek, the house sat vacant for years. Nature began reclaiming the property, vines creeping up the walls, and the treehouse growing darker and more foreboding. The story of the cursed treehouse became a whispered legend in the town. But curiosity is a powerful force, and sometimes it attracts the wrong kind of attention. In the fall of 2018, a group of urban explorers stumbled upon the story of the treehouse online. The group, led by Mark and his girlfriend Lily, specialized in investigating haunted locations and uploading their experiences to their YouTube channel, Haunt Seekers. Eager to boost their views, they decided to visit the Thompson property. The four-person team arrived at dusk, their cameras and flashlights in tow. The house itself was eerie but uneventful. Dusty furniture, broken windows, and the occasional creak of floorboards. It wasn't until they reached the backyard that the atmosphere shifted. The treehouse loomed above them, its dark wood glinting faintly under the dying light. Mark felt an inexplicable heaviness in the air, but he pushed the feeling aside. "All right, team," he said, turning to the camera. "This is the infamous Willow Creek treehouse. Rumor has it, this place is cursed. Let's find out if the stories are true." As they climbed the rickety ladder, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. Lily hesitated, a chill running down her spine. "I don't like this," she muttered. "Come on, it's just a treehouse," Mark replied, his bravado masking his unease. Inside, the treehouse was damp and cold. The spiral marking was still there, now partially covered by moss and dirt. Lily's flashlight flickered and she swore she saw the shadows move. While filming, one of their team members, Jake, noticed something unusual. The photographs Ethan had found were still there, but they looked different. The scratched-out eyes seemed to glisten as if wet, and the faces appeared twisted, almost alive. "Guys, check this out," Jake said, holding up one of the photos. As soon as he touched it, a loud thud echoed beneath the treehouse. "Probably just an animal," Mark said, though his voice wavered. As the group continued exploring, strange phenomena began to unfold. Their cameras malfunctioned, capturing only static when pointed at the spiral. Lily felt something brush against her arm, though no one was near her. "Let's get out of here," she pleaded, but Mark refused. "We came here for proof, and we're not leaving without it." That's when the whispers began, soft at first, then growing louder, a cacophony of overlapping voices. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakably hostile. Panicked, the group tried to descend the ladder, but it was gone. Somehow it had collapsed without a sound, leaving them trapped. The temperature in the treehouse plummeted, their breath visible in the dim light. Suddenly, the spiral on the floor began to glow faintly, the jagged symbols pulsing with a sickly green light. From the corner of the room, the shadowy figure emerged. It was more defined now, its shape humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. The figure seemed to absorb the light, its presence suffocating. Lily screamed as the figure lunged toward her, but it stopped inches from her face, tilting its head as if studying her. "Leave," it whispered, its voice like nails on glass. "Or stay, forever." In a desperate bid for survival, Jake grabbed the wooden box containing the photographs and hurled it at the spiral. The box shattered and the glowing symbols flickered before extinguishing. The shadow figure let out a guttural roar, and the group seized the moment to jump from the treehouse. They hit the ground hard, bruised but alive. Without looking back, they sprinted to their car and drove away, the whispers chasing them until they crossed the town's border. When they reviewed their footage, they found nothing but corrupted files. The only clear image was a single frame of the shadowy figure, its hollow eyes staring directly at the camera. Mark uploaded the video with the title, "The Treehouse Will Never Return To," and it quickly went viral. But the group never spoke of the event again. Lily, however, wasn't so lucky. Weeks after their visit, she began hearing whispers in her apartment. Objects moved on their own, and she often woke up to find muddy footprints leading from her door to her bed. The others distanced themselves, too afraid to intervene. But one by one, they all disappeared. First Jake, then Mark. Lily was last seen staring out her apartment window, her face pale and her eyes hollow. The treehouse remains standing, drawing thrill seekers and ghost hunters. But those who enter never leave unchanged. Some vanish without a trace, others return, but they're never the same, and the shadow waits, growing stronger with every soul it claims. The story of the Willow Creek treehouse reached far and wide after the Haunt Seekers video went viral. But for every chilling story, there were skeptics, people convinced it was an elaborate hoax. One of those skeptics was Professor Daniel Reeves, a paranormal investigator who prided himself on debunking myths. Armed with his tools and years of experience, Daniel decided to visit the treehouse to prove once and for all that the horrors were nothing more than overactive imaginations and clever editing. Daniel arrived in Willow Creek on a foggy morning. The town seemed deserted, as if its inhabitants avoided outsiders who might ask too many questions. When he stopped at a diner to get directions, the waitress froze at the mention of the treehouse. "Don't go there," she warned, her voice trembling. "People who go there don't come back." Daniel dismissed her fears with a polite smile. "I've been to dozens of haunted places. They're just stories, nothing more." She leaned closer, her expression grave. "It's not the treehouse you should fear. It's what's inside it. The shadow isn't bound to the tree. Once it knows you, it follows you." Despite the warning, Daniel pressed on. When Daniel arrived at the Thompson property, he was struck by how eerily quiet it was. The air felt heavy and the surrounding trees seemed to lean toward the house as if shielding the treehouse from view. He set up his equipment, an EMF meter, a thermal camera, and a voice recorder. As he approached the treehouse, his EMF meter spiked erratically. He chuckled to himself. "Probably interference from old wiring," he muttered, though he knew there was no electricity nearby. The treehouse seemed almost alive. Its wooden walls groaned, and the spiral symbol on the floor appeared freshly carved, despite years of abandonment. As Daniel climbed the ladder, he felt an inexplicable resistance, as though the air itself was pushing him back. Inside, the treehouse was darker than it should have been, even with the midday sun outside. He began speaking into his recorder. "The structure is in remarkable condition given its age, no signs of tampering or recent activity." Suddenly, his recorder emitted a sharp static. A voice broke through. "Leave!" Daniel froze, replaying the recording. The voice was faint but unmistakable. Intrigued, he pressed on, setting up his thermal camera to capture the room. Through the viewfinder, he noticed something chilling, a cold spot near the spiral symbol shaped like a crouching figure. As he moved closer to the spiral, the room grew colder. His breath fogged the air, and the floor beneath him seemed to shift, as if alive. Then, the shadow appeared. It rose from the spiral, its form more defined than in the Haunt Seeker's footage. Its hollow eyes locked onto Daniel, and he felt a crushing weight on his chest. "Who are you?" he managed to choke out. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it extended an impossibly long arm pointing at Daniel. The spiral on the floor began to glow again, the jagged symbols pulsating with malevolent energy. The treehouse shook violently, and Daniel's equipment shorted out. The walls seemed to close in, the wood groaning as if alive. Realizing he was in mortal danger, Daniel grabbed his gear and scrambled down the ladder. The shadow followed, its form seeping through the cracks in the wood like smoke. As he sprinted toward his car, he could hear whispers, thousands of voices overlapping, growing louder and louder. When he reached the car, the engine wouldn't start. The shadow was getting closer, its presence suffocating. In a desperate move, Daniel grabbed the rosary hanging from his rearview mirror and held it up. The shadow recoiled briefly, giving him just enough time to start the car and speed away. Back in his office, Daniel reviewed the footage. Most of it was corrupted, but a single frame stood out. The shadow, fully formed, standing in the spiral with its arm outstretched, pointing directly at the camera. That night, Daniel woke to the sound of whispers in his apartment. His equipment was destroyed, his notes torn to shreds. And in the corner of his room, the shadow stood, watching him. Daniel vanished a week later. His disappearance sparked new interest in the treehouse, attracting more investigators, thrill seekers, and skeptics. Each one added a new layer to the legend. But the shadow doesn't wait for visitors anymore. Those who learn about the treehouse, who speak its name, who dare to seek it out, unknowingly invite the curse into their lives. And so the question remains, would you dare to visit the horrific treehouse? The horrific events tied to the Willow Creek treehouse were no longer confined to urban legends or obscure YouTube videos. Reports of hauntings, missing persons, and strange sightings began to surface across the country. It seemed that the shadow wasn't just bound to the treehouse anymore. It was spreading, like a malignant force infecting anyone who came too close to its story. Among the rising chaos was Claire Morrison, a journalist determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. Claire wasn't afraid of ghost stories. She had built her career exposing frauds and unraveling mysteries. But as she delved deeper into the treehouse's history, she realized this wasn't like anything she'd encountered before. A growing obsession. Claire started her investigation by compiling accounts from survivors, the Thompson family, the Haunt Seekers crew, and local townsfolk who had experienced the treehouse's presence firsthand. Each story shared eerie similarities, whispers, shadowy figures, and the glowing spiral. But what disturbed Claire most was that many of these witnesses had disappeared. gone mad, or died under mysterious circumstances. Her research led her to a chilling discovery. The spiral symbol wasn't unique to Willow Creek. It had been found in other locations, on cave walls, ancient manuscripts, and even crime scenes. It was tied to rituals meant to summon entities from beyond our world. Claire's obsession grew. She dreamed of the treehouse, its spiral glowing brighter each night. The shadow began appearing in the corners of her vision, watching silently as she worked late into the night. The return to Willow Creek, unable to resist the pull, Claire decided to visit the treehouse. She rationalized it as journalistic integrity. Seeing the site for herself would lend credibility to her story. But deep down, she felt something calling her, an irresistible compulsion to confront the shadow. Equipped with a camera, a flashlight, and a notebook, she drove to Willow Creek under the cover of darkness. The air grew heavier the closer she got, and by the time she reached the property, her hands were trembling. The treehouse looked more decayed than in the photos, but its presence was as menacing as ever. The spiral marking was faintly visible even from the ground, glowing softly in the moonlight. The descent into madness. As Claire climbed the ladder, the whispers began. They were faint at first, then grew louder, merging into an unintelligible roar. When she reached the top, the treehouse seemed to pulse with life. The spiral on the floor glowed brighter, the symbols twisting and rearranging themselves as if reacting to her presence. She turned on her camera, documenting everything. "This is Claire Morrison," she whispered into the mic, her voice shaking. "I'm standing inside the Willow Creek treehouse, the source of something far beyond my understanding." The shadow appeared, its form more distinct than ever. It no longer lingered in the corners, but stood directly in front of her. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its outstretched hand pointed at her camera. "You shouldn't have come," it rasped, its voice echoing in her mind. The floor began to shift beneath her feet, the wood twisting and warping as though alive. The spiral's glow intensified, and suddenly Claire felt herself being pulled toward it. She tried to resist, clawing at the walls, but the force was too strong. An unthinkable revelation. As she was dragged into the spiral, Claire's surroundings dissolved. She found herself in a dark, endless void, the shadow standing before her. Around them floated the faces of the missing, the Thompson children, the haunt-seekers, and countless others. "They're all here," the shadow said, its voice hollow and cruel. "Bound to me, just as you will be." Claire's mind reeled as she realized the truth. The treehouse wasn't just cursed, it was a gateway, a trap designed to feed the shadow. Every person who stepped inside became part of its collection, their souls fueling its power. "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This can't be real." "You sought the truth," the shadow replied. "Now you are part of it." A final broadcast. Back in the real world, Claire's camera continued recording. It captured her screams, the glow of the spiral, and the moment she vanished without a trace. The footage was discovered weeks later by hikers who stumbled upon the treehouse. It quickly went viral, reigniting interest in the legend. But those who watched it reported strange phenomena, whispers, nightmares, and sightings of the shadow. Some say the shadow is no longer confined to the treehouse. It moves freely now, drawn to those who seek the truth, and with every soul it claims, its power grows. The question remains, would you dare to watch the footage? Would you dare to visit the treehouse? Or has the shadow already found you simply by knowing its story?